Hey, y'all. This is Aaliyah. I'm coming with y'all with some thoughts. This is not a lesson. This is not something that's super, sitting on the pedestal on high. This is simply me just kind of talking through some things that have been on my mind for the last few days and just getting a chance to connect with y'all and see, what's on your mind and what you're thinking, and just, let's have a conversation. In my Facebook group, I asked the question to the ladies about, just how are they processing everything that's going on with the Nipsey Hussle death and the murder, and less around what we think about, who did it and what we think about him, but just kind of like the way that as a community that we have been responding to this death. Because I've been having a lot of feelings, and y'all might have seen my cryptic post a few days ago about, just that I was choosing not to respond. I was choosing not to engage with people around it because I had some feelings that just truthfully were not going to be very helpful. And since I have a few minutes before I can go to where I'm supposed to be because the parking lot is full, I just thought I'm going to come in here and tell y'all what I'm thinking about it. So let me just kind of play back what's been on my mind about that. Hey, Natasha, and y'all, this is the conversation, so chime in, say what you think. This is interactive. I want to respond to what y'all are thinking too. When Nipsey's murder, let me say this is my first caveat. I know very little about him as a person. I know very little about his music, but from what I've been seeing online is that there's just a lot of positivity around what he's done for the community, and not just what he's done on a very tangible level in the community, but also the hope that he inspired in so many people, and giving them hope about how they might restore and really build and sow into their communities, and how we don't have to leave our communities, and we don't have to kind of take our dollar elsewhere to have impact. And that alone brought up so many feelings and thoughts with me, because it made me think about how I'm from a small community in California, and how back in the day our community was like super pro-black. If y'all know anything about the Bay Area in the 70s and the 80s, and y'all know a little tiny bit if you've seen Black Panther, that it was really a movement. It was really about black people coming together and being beautifully black, and coming together and really thinking about how we might just really transform our community and transform just who we are as Black Americans. And then of course the crack epidemic happened, right? And completely destroyed everything that we were building, and not only destroyed everything that we're building on a tangible level, but really destroyed our trust and our hope in each other. And so I respect, and as a result, when so many of us, went away to school, or got the education, or got the money, we left, and present company included, because not because we didn't necessarily believe in our community, but we left because it was a safety issue. If you grew up in East Palo Alto in the 90s, far too many people that got killed, and you knew that often it was indiscriminate. It wasn't just those people that were out there banging and hustling, but we're all 1 degree from somebody that's banging and hustling, or we're in the wrong place in the wrong time. So a lot of us left for safety reasons, and it was really dangerous for us to sow into our community. But at the same time, when the brain drain happens, then all that's left are people that are struggling, and that takes the innovation, and it takes just so many things out in a community, and we can't survive as a community. So on that level, I really want to say I respect what he stood for, and I respect what he stands for in terms of building into the community. But I do got to say something about the conspiracy that's been going on about, why, that there's a conspiracy about who killed him and who murdered him and all of that. And I'm not going to talk too much about Dr. Sebi, because I really don't know a lot about him. Like, I've read, but I haven't gone in depth and really studied. Excuse me, y'all, I'm in my car, so I got to turn on this AC, and it's hot. But this is what was really interesting to me about the reaction to his death. What was interesting to me was literally like within hours, within minutes of it, that there were a lot of people talking about this conspiracy, and that somebody externally had set up to kill Nipsey. And of course, within 24 hours, we saw that really what happened was that it was retaliation from somebody in his own set, somebody in his own crew, somebody that was really close to him, because they didn't like the way that he so-called disrespected him, and allegations about theft. Again, this is all he say, she say at this point, but that seems to be the credible story at this point. And what was really deep to me, y'all, was that we were so, like, really within minutes willing to talk about, this conspiracy. excuse me, willing to talk about, I forgot to put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Hold on, y'all. Willing to talk about, you know, what is, I apologize. But when it came down to what really happened, we got quiet. We didn't want to talk about the fact that, again, toxic masculinity had reared its ugly head. We didn't even want to talk about the kind of shit that we do to each other in our communities when we disagree. We don't want to talk about, you know, about the violence that we use to wield power, that we're not willing to talk about just really the epidemic of violence in our community, because I think it feels uncomfortable. And more than uncomfortable, it feels dangerous, because some of us feel really helpless against what's going on in our communities, and not just our communities as, you know, like this monolithic Black community, but what's going on in terms of how we deal with conflict and how we hold ourselves responsible or don't hold ourselves responsible for shit that goes on. It's really easy for us to deal with perceived disrespect in violent ways. And what's interesting is that violence is usually turned inward. And so, of course, we could talk about trauma, and we could talk about why people are the way that they are, and we could talk about all of the ways that, you know, why we got into that position that we're in. But the reality is that this is where we are, and it's really difficult for us to talk about the trauma and the violence that we inflict on ourselves, because it would cause us to have to look in the mirror, one. And it will cause us to really acknowledge the violence that we perpetuate in our own families, in our own close circles. And I understand the difficulty in doing that, but it was really just fascinating to me how this brother died in an extremely violent way. And if the accounts are true, in front of his family and in front of his friends and in front of his loved ones and in front of his wife. And we don't want to talk about that part. We don't want to really deal with that part. I'm sorry, I'm gonna come back to your comment in a second, Natasha. But we want to deal with this outside boogeyman. You know, we want to. It's easier for us to deal with this outside boogeyman because we don't want to deal with the violence within. And even still, in our not dealing with this, like, you know, you can't pass by anybody's Facebook timeline at this point and not see this public mourning and this public coming to grips about what happened to Nipsey. And this is what's interesting to me about that, because on the same time, we look at the woman who in Deep Ellum, Texas, Deep Ellum, Dallas, actually, that was just brutally assaulted by this bartender who also was accused of doing wrong. And I'm sorry, this bartender who was pissed off because he felt like he was disrespected in whatever kind of way, and just brutally attacked this woman. And what's been interesting to me was the community response. And what I see with the community response was, of course, nobody is justifying this bartender's behavior. Nobody's justifying and saying that he was right. But I don't see the same volume of people going out in defense of this woman. I don't see the same volume and outrage and let's go out and support our sister in the violence that she had to deal with and that she encountered. And it makes me think about how, as women, and especially as Black women, we've all been conditioned to just accept that women will endure violence and that women will endure pain. And yes, that it sucks and it's wrong, but it's so normal for women in particular to go through pain and to just kind of deal with it and to kind of just bear the brunt of that. And it makes me think about how, just for lack of a better words, like, it's just so fucked up how we are conditioned to accept women's pain, but we still can't believe or deal with the pain that men go through. And what does that really say about just us that call ourselves conscious, us that call ourselves that cares about our community, us that cares about the development of others? What does that say that we are so normalized and conditioned to accept women's pain but not men? And what does that really mean about what kind of truths do we need to tell ourselves, and what kind of work do we need to do ourselves to say, one, this is an issue, this is a thing. Can we call a spade a spade? Can we look at it and say the way we treat women's pain is very different than the way that we treat men's pain publicly? And how, I'm even thinking about just, you know, another example, and this is, again, I'm not saying it's apples to apples, but just thinking about the ways that when certain things happen to men, that we're just like all in arms and outrage. But then when the same kind of shit happened to women, we're just like, yeah, that sucks. Yeah, that's kind of what women have to go through. Yeah, that's the plight. And we moving on to the next thing. Like, we can go through countless examples of police brutality and police violence against women and see how as a community we respond so differently to what happens to Black women versus what happens to Black men. And this is not to say that black men or black women have to be against each other. But I think what it does say is like, we need to really examine the ways that we just kind of accept behaviors differently. And then also not only what we accept differently, but what does it say about our own psyche? What does that say about you psychologically, that you end up almost being conditioned to believe that if this shit happens to us, then it just goes with the plight of being a woman? And then what message do we send to our kids and to our community when we just condition that same kind of thought process? And that's just kind of what's been on my mind. And it makes me think about how, just as we develop as a people and as individuals, that this work is truly never done. There's never a place where you come to this place of like arrivedness or, you know, healing, but it's always a journey. But in order for it to be a worthwhile journey, in order for us to have progress, we got to be conscious of what it is that we're dealing with, and conscious about what tools we're seeking out to dismantle that. Because I don't know about you, but I really do have a lot of hope in the future, but I don't think that everybody's going to be there with me, because I really believe that there are some people that are really clear and deliberate about, you know, this shit ain't right now, but I can take the steps necessary to grow and to progress in that direction. And there are some people that are just really dead set on replicating the same shit that their mamas done taught them, their mamas done taught them, their grannies, and like, you know, that it just goes generationally, the pathology and the ways of thinking, and I don't want to say unevolved, or I don't want to say immature, but kind of like I don't know what that, but that kind of base level survival lack of awareness. Maybe that's what it is. Just like this lack of awareness that the way that you're doing things is not necessarily the most healthy way, and it's not the only way, and that there is more out there, especially in this age of information, that there's so many opportunities for us to grow and to learn, but we don't take advantage of it. It's always fascinating to me how you can be on that same internet to post some whatever on Facebook, but you can't use that same internet to do some research. It's always interesting to me that we just kind of accept that this is how relationships are, this is just how I am, or this is just how things are, because nobody ever taught me or nobody ever showed me. And I'm going to talk about myself too. Like, I remember in my first marriage, I used to say, well, I don't know how to be a good wife or a good partner because nobody ever taught me. But if there's anything else in my life outside of relationships that I don't know, I seek out that knowledge, I seek out that coaching, I seek out that development, and I don't use that as an excuse to prevent me from doing that other thing in my life. So why don't I also apply that same thought and that same desire and that same drive to grow in this personal part of my life? So that's kind of what's on my mind. It's on my mind just not only just because everything is going on my Facebook timeline. It's on my mind because I just went to this really dope training about change management, and not just changing an organization, but how do you really manage change within yourself, and the barriers and the obstacles that we go through that prevent us from changing, even when it is life and death situations, and how you know, it really challenged my own beliefs. And and sometimes I had this guilt about, you know, I'm a coach, I'm a leader, I'm a this, I should know this. But the reality is that I'm always growing, and I appreciate the fact that I can be open to mentoring and to coaching and to growth and to development, even as I'm growing and coaching and developing others. And so yeah, so I'm just kind of really excited about what that's bringing out in me. It's making me excited about what I'm developing in other people, and that's what's on my mind. So let me go through these comments real quick and see what you guys have to say. And so Natasha says, so she said that she thinks it was all a setup about, you know, what's going on, because if you know that somebody's beefing with you, you wouldn't just be there. So, you know, I think at this point, and then Douche did shoot him literally 6 times, but I think that, you know, of course in the next few days that's coming, we're going to learn a lot more about what happened. But again, it just goes to show that we don't need external enemies for us to kind of stay down as a community, so to speak, because our enemies, so to speak, can be right there next door. Our enemies can be the person that you sharing a meal with. Our enemies can be the person that share the same last name as you. That, you know, we are so concentrating sometimes on our external enemies that we're not willing to really call a spade about what we're dealing with up close and personal. And as a result, we end up spreading false loyalties to people just because we have some kind of tie in common. That's a whole other talk for another day, because I got a whole lot of thoughts about that. But I think this what it really boils down to is our ability to tell the truth about what we see, our ability to really open our eyes to what it is that we're seeing, and to tell the truth about what's happening, and really being willing to push our evolution in how we define what our values are. That our values can't be just because we share the same race. Our values can't be just because we have the same last name, or the same religion, or we came from the same community. That we really got to develop what our core values are overall, and then use those as our boundaries and how we deal and influence people. Because if not, you know, you be literally sleeping with the enemy. And Famira says the journey is never over. It will never be over until the last day that we take a breath on this planet. But even then, our journey continues as ancestors. So I agree with you, Famira, that the journey is never over. But at the same time, I don't want to be in the same place that I was last year. I don't want to be in the same place that I was 2 years ago. I don't want to be in the same place that I was 10 years ago. That I hope that I'll always be moving to that next phase. So if you are just coming on here, you're catching the replay, or you have some other thoughts, what are you thinking about, you know, just the ways that we deal with publicly Black women's pain versus Black men's pain? And what does that really say? And not only what does that say about the community, but what does that say about kind of what work do you think that it reveals that we got to do on an individual level? All right, y'all. Love y'all. Come back to you next time. Let me go see if I can find some parking. And this has been fun.